Hello, learners of the course of DCE, Diploma in Creative Writing in English of IGNOU. Welcome to today's lesson. I'm your lecturer, counselor, Kiran Misra. And today I'll be taking up the topic of credibility and authenticity in writing fiction. Why is there a need to write with authenticity and how to go about it? Credibility in your writing is very crucial if you want your readers to suspend disbelief and immerse themselves in your story. They want to be able to believe in your story and enjoy it. So, for that, you'll have to take the time to do your research and make sure that any details that you include are correct. If you include anything that is not correct, you may irritate or worse still, offend the readers. Let me tell you, all the details that you put down in your fiction do matter. And very, very obvious gross discrepancies are a big turn-off. What is credibility? Credibility is the willingness to accept something as true in the characters and in their story world. And they must be meticulously nurtured in the literary story as an art form. What happens when your credibility is lacking? You see, credibility slips with illogical progression of plot ideas or with poorly integrated character thoughts, actions, and words. Readers will fail to connect to a story where there is erosion of credibility, and your writing will not succeed. Credibility in plot logic is the easiest to identify and discuss. As characters move through the story, choices are made for their action in the plot. And please understand that lazy or untalented choices will sink the story. Let's take an example of a story plot where there's a prodigal son who comes to the bedside of his dying father, whom he has not seen since childhood. What happens next? He falls on his knees and weeps. He smothers his father to death with a pillow. He asks his sister to bring him a drink. He remains motionless, unable to feel emotion, and so on and so forth. There are so many choices that one could make, but there is only one right choice for any one great story. An author finds that the best choice after he or she seeks alternative after an alternative. Most of these choices are made in your mind. But often, if you have an outline, it helps for timing and positioning, especially with the critical story actions. So please understand that never take your first thought as your best. It rarely will be. In characterization, the credibility issue constantly lurks. It's a common error that authors make and that make the reader reject and dislike the story in varying degrees. So, you can think of credibility issues on two levels. First is the immediate level. Is immediate story action, thought, reflection, or words of a character logical for that moment? And for what the reader knows about that character at that moment? Second is the overall. Is the character developing in the story logically and along the lines closely related to the theme of the story? Characters are chosen for a story by authors for 1. The capabilities of either having significant enlightenment about something, or the second, for their potential of having significant change in their thinking and beliefs about something. So, as characters are developed, details and actions must be logical for how the characters will be irreversibly changed, how they will evolve, how they will grow. And so you need credible emotional content in a scene. That is something to be considered to match exactly what is needed for the story for the moment. Paradoxically, to create tension in the reader from emotions in the story is not sufficient to crank up the language with 4-letter expletives, 2-word sentences, and imperatives, and describe things as brightest and loudest, which I do find in some of the modern fiction. In fact, for best writing, worthy emotional scenes are created without emotionally charged abstract language. Like he was flooded by fear and love. Instead, by terse, clear, concrete language and structure. The emotional valence of a scene must also coincide with what the reader will expect at any point in the story. Surprise is a very important and necessary component in storytelling. But then the surprise must be credible too. To fail in this breaks the connection between the reader and the character. And that is a connect that is very necessary for good stories. Now, it may seem odd to you, but credibility need not relate to the reality of the reader's world. Credibility is judged by the story world created by the author and told by the narrator. So, a plot shift or a character decision set in 1929 needs only be credible for the story, and it need not be credible for the time in which the reader is in existence. As the story is introduced, there is a contract of details established between the author and the reader. They are unstated, of course, and that continues to develop throughout the story. And that will establish what is and what is not credible. There is a tendency for an author to dismiss consideration of credibility. But authors cannot afford to risk rejection of a story by a reader because of failure to address credibility issues. Successful story writing needs credible plot and characters for the story world that the reader can accept in their existing story world. This acceptance is, at least partly, humane character development through character change rather than just characterization that deals with description of the character before the story begins. So to sum it up, for credibility, the final story product, novel or short story, must have reasonable thoughts and actions built on logical associations and progressions. Total reader acceptance of timing and progression of story elements, and total believability that the emotional content of the writing matches the need for story development. Now, to illustrate the theoretical points that I've been giving you, let's take up writing crime and legal fiction. Writing about a highly technical topic like crime or law can be intimidating. In the world of criminal law, there are innumerable rules, practices, and procedures. Criminal lawyers speak their own language. To write a good crime or legal story, a writer needs to have credibility. And credibility comes from working within the rules of criminal law and speaking the criminal law language. But then, you're a writer. You don't have to be a cop or a lawyer to write about crime or criminal law with authenticity. So, what should you do? First step, brainstorm. As in any genre, a good story with interesting characters and plot twists must be the starting point. Physically write out brainstorming ideas without regard to order, quality, or completeness. Just start writing and let the ideas flow. Next, get inspired. Inspiration often comes from outside sources. Inspiration often comes from outside sources, often unexpectedly. So, read great books, watch great movies, especially crime and legal drama, read about crime in the news, follow interesting trials, watch true crime stories on television, and read true crime books. You never know when some small tidbit will spark a story in you. Next, you have to prepare an outline. Everyone has their own methods and opinions about outlining, whether organized by chapter, act, scene, character, or plot point. Outlining is a critical tool to organize a story. The more complex the story, the more important an outline can be. Outline can be especially important in a crime novel or legal drama because your story needs to fit within the rules of criminal law world. For example, if you want to have a piece of exculpatory evidence discovered at the end of Act 2, you will have to know what stage of the legal proceedings the case is in to help determine how the evidence could realistically come to light. Then, the next step is please educate yourself. Read up about real criminal law on the internet and in books. Look out for information specifically targeted to the non-lawyer. Watch real trials when they are televised. Watch true crime shows. Although they often cut out a lot of detail, especially the procedural stuff, they usually get things right. Read news stories and true crime books. The same warning goes out for these sources. They are usually accurate, but they often leave out the details you might want to know. Do not rely on talking head lawyer commentators on television. They usually speak off the tops of their head and often get things wrong. They also often have an agenda that they are pushing and speak of things from that point of view. And finally, do not rely on other criminal law fiction. Crime fiction on television, on movies, and books are often completely eye-rolling off the mark. And the next, consult an expert. When in doubt, ask a question. As you brainstorm, outline and draft, keep notes of questions that come up. Consulting an expert, usually a criminal lawyer, can be costly. So try to know what you want guidance on before you can contact someone. Also, be sure to speak to someone who's able to explain things simply and clearly, and who's willing to admit when they do not know something. Follow these steps and it'll give you a writer confidence to create within the world of criminal law and to begin writing crime and legal stories with authenticity. Well, I guess the same goes if you're writing historical fiction, historical romances, or talking about certain events, catastrophes that happened in the past. A whole lot of research needs to be done on the period, on the people, and that is something that I'll be taking up in my subsequent lessons online. So thank you for joining me on this session. Happy writing. Thank you.